A group in Massachusetts hopes to change the method of choosing candidates in elections. The goal is to reduce the impact of spoiler candidates and give more weight to voter preference, even if it's for a second or third best option. The system of ranked choice voting has been recently adopted in Maine. To make the case here in Massachusetts is a former candidate for governor and an advisory member of Voter Choice Massachusetts. We'd like to welcome Evan Falchuk.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for being with us. Evan, I'm going to start with the time you ran for governor in 2014.
It's true.
And, you were one of the third-party candidates, maybe the only one who was unenrolled in Democrat or Republican. So what was the difference here?
Well, in the way we vote right now, the person who has the most votes always wins, even if they didn't get a majority of the vote. And what it means is that people have to be very strategic about how they vote. There were people that said they didn't want to vote for me because they were afraid that I couldn't win or that it would throw the election to someone that they didn't like if they voted for me. So with ranked choice voting, it gets rid of that concept of the spoiler and makes it possible for people to express their actual preferences for candidates. And that's a needed upgrade in our voting system.
Now, another example I'm thinking of in Massachusetts is a vote for governor in 2010. Deval Patrick won his second term over Charlie Baker, but Tim Cahill got a lot of votes. He ran as an independent. So I'm saying, if it were not for Tim Cahill, what would have happened there maybe?
That's right. And what's unfortunate is that we, as voters, don't really get our preferences reflected in how these elections turn out. So with ranked choice voting, what's very interesting about it is that you get to rank your choices based on who you like the most. So you'd say, I'm going to put the person I really like first, and then I'm going to put the person who is my backup choice second. Say in a three-party race, they would do that. So that someone could have voted for me first, and they could have voted for Martha Coakley second. And after the first round of counting, if no one had a majority of the votes, the third place finisher gets thrown out, and all the person's votes then get put to their second choice. So what ended up happening in 2014 in my case is that the people that voted for me, if I didn't have enough, they would have been thrown out and they would have gone to Martha Coakley, for example. It could have had a different outcome, we don't know. Same thing in 2010. But what we need to do is have a system where it's possible to really capture what voters are looking for and to make that what's reflected in our system.
Now, and of course, in 2016, let's say you had some progressive people who liked Jill Stein. She didn't have a chance. And if you look at some of those third-party candidates in 2016, I think they got more votes than the difference between Trump and Hillary Clinton.
In key swing states, absolutely. So if a person had voted for Jill Stein and then put Hillary as the second choice, then those votes would have transferred to Hillary when she didn't have enough to win, and we would have had a totally different outcome. Part of the problem that we have right now is that the parties, the two parties, really control who gets put on the ballot in the general election. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction among voters. Ranked choice voting makes it possible for more independent and third-party candidates to run because they have a fair shot. They have a fair shot to be on the ballot. They have a fair shot to win, and voters don't have to be afraid to vote for them. So again, it's a needed upgrade in our system. This
is BNN News. We're talking with Evan Falchuk from Voter Choice Massachusetts. Evan, you were involved in the adoption of this option in Maine. I know they have a senator there in Congress who is neither Democrat nor Republican. But other than that, what is it about Maine that made them adopt this?
Well, they've got a tradition of having a lot of independent voters and independent candidates in Maine. Interestingly enough, even though that's the case, they couldn't pass that through the legislature. They ended up doing it with a ballot initiative in Maine. And the legislature decided it didn't want to implement it. So now there's another vote happening in Maine to override the legislature. There's no question that ranked choice voting poses a threat to the political establishment as it's currently set up. They like the two parties the ability to handpick those candidates and have those be the ones that we get to choose from. So voters have to take the lead on this. Here in Massachusetts, we have a chance to implement this through the legislature. There is legislation in the House right now that isn't really moving anyplace. The state Democratic Party did adopt this as part of its platform. But I think what's going to happen is that we're going to be looking at 2020 and see the need for a ballot initiative here in Massachusetts as well.
Now, I do have to ask about one curiosity here. Could this be used in city elections, especially if you've got a city council with 4 at-large candidates that you can pick?
Yeah, you could. I mean, Cambridge has it. And, in the mayor's election in Boston, for example, in 2013, there were, 12, 13 candidates, and then the top 2 ended up being the final election choices. But the trouble is, those top 2 ended up with, say, 14 and 13% of the vote. That's not reflective of true voter preferences. It isn't to say that the election would have come out differently, but it isn't fair to have people being the finalists in an election that only get that small minority of voters.
And of course, the other thing here is that if you like a good old bullet vote, you can still just bullet, right?
You could still vote however you want. There's no change in that. It's an opportunity to give voters more power, more opportunities to choose, and more choices from which to choose.
Now, the next thing is you got to implement this. You got to make sure people are not confused by it. You got to make sure that people in City Hall can count the numbers correctly. I mean, this is stuff that gets kind of nettlesome, right, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, the way I think of it is that it's different, not difficult. And the process of educating voters around this is something we should be doing anyway. We need more civics education. So if this becomes an opportunity to teach people about how we vote and the power that voters have to decide on the most important issues that they face, that's a good thing. We need more than anything right now in our country with the challenges we have to have that kind of civic engagement and have people have confidence that they've got the power to influence the way that our system works. So I see this as nothing short of a great opportunity to drive more civic engagement and to have a better system going forward.
I'm old enough to sense that politics in this country is much more polarized than it was 20 or 40 years ago. Does this kind of voting change that in any way, you think?
It really does. I mean, part of the problem we have right now is that if you're running in a Democratic or Republican primary, it's smart politics to focus on base voters and get them to show up to the polls and get you in. What that means is that we always hear, like on TV, the analysts saying that candidate's going to pivot to the center for the general election. Of course, as a voter, I hear that and I say, so which version of that candidate was the real version of the candidate? Ranked choice voting means you've got to reach out to voters all across the spectrum, all throughout the political process. So you may want those core base voters, but that's not going to be enough to get you over the top in the general election, since the winner has to have a majority. So what it means is that there'll be less polarization, there'll be more engagement with voters, more of an effort to reach out across traditional party lines, and that's what voters want. They don't want to hear the hyper-partisanship. They don't want the talking points. They just want people to be genuine and to truly engage them on the issues.
So where do you go from here to get this going?
Well, we're involved in a very robust public education campaign all around the state. There are thousands of people that have already signed up to participate in this. There's organizing events happening all around the Commonwealth. If you go to voterchoicema.org, you can read all about it and get involved in it. It's a really wonderful organization with a great group of leaders on the advisory board as well. So this is the future of voting, not just in Massachusetts, but around the country.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Chris.
Evan Falchuk.